You're listening to Merykid Explains, an oral history of one artist's discography featuring facts, feelings, and most importantly, context. Now, maybe you stumbled here by accident, or perhaps you're listening on some faraway planet in some distant time, vibing off an ancient method of communication. Or maybe, just maybe, you're one of the dozens of die-hard Merykid fans that actually finds value in this content. Regardless, feel free to sit back, get comfortable, and listen along to the gentle ramblings of a man and his memories. This is Merykid Explains.
This episode is special for me because it sort of captured a time in my life that was a hugely pivotal experience, so to speak. As I'm recording this, I'm actually sitting in the studio that DEATHBLOOM was written and recorded in. I thought it would be a nice touch to change up the scenery a little bit in order to capture some of the same, atmosphere and energy that the actual record was recorded with. So at the end of the previous episode, that being exit music, you'll remember I had quit music, become very sick, found that music was the only thing that could sort of give me a peace of mind as I was dealing with a substance-fueled anxiety sort of life. There's no better way to explain it than I had been given several medications at the same time that sort of pushed my what was the term? It's a imbalance of like a chemical imbalance is what I had sort of been medically pushed into, and I was living a life where I was constantly having panic attacks and something called brain zaps, which again is when electricity fires off in your brain at random times. For me, it was when I would be sleeping. And as I pointed out in the previous episode, if you can imagine the absolute horror of being awakened in the middle of the deepest part of your sleep by a shock and burst of electricity zapping you in the brain. That's what my life was like. And the only thing I found I could possibly do to ease a lot of that anxiety was working on music and writing music. And what exit music became was based out of the sort of ideas and sketches that I would put together in this kind of fear and highly anxious time where I was just literally doing anything I could to sort of steer off insanity. And when exit music actually started to form into something a little bit more concrete, I ended up taking it very serious and took the time to really put together a project that I liked a lot and was very proud of. And when I set it to release, I think it was around January of 2020, you set the time several months in advance when it's supposed to come out. I chose this very specific date, which was Good Friday for 2020, which at the time was April 10th. Lo and behold, sometime in March, the entire world shut down. COVID took over. The world has never been the same. I'm recording this in 2022, where currently today it was announced that San Antonio is going through its highest surge in COVID cases since the original COVID days. It's just a never-ending, seemingly pandemic of sorts. And so when I released exit music, when I originally set the release date for exit music, it was just another day in the life. And when it actually came out, the world was a different place. Nobody was listening to music. Everybody was just sort of watching the news and stuck inside. We were all, the whole world was in quarantine. all of America was quarantined. And that's exactly when Exit Music was released. It was so ridiculous to think that I had it's very defeatist, but it's funny in like the sort of greater picture, in a sort of like cosmic, universal, karmic way, to think that Exit Music had a chance when I had so just boldly announced that I had quit music, and I had put so much pressure on music, and I was so angry at music, and I directed so much aggression and inner turmoil at music. And here I was suddenly just, hey, look, it's me, music. I'm in music again. And I thought that that was going to go over. It was not. The karmic gods had something to say about it, and they made sure that I was shown that it would not be that simple to just eat the words that I had been, that I had been spewing for the last 6 years at this point, from 2014 to 2020. I did not release any more music, and I completely pivoted into a different life. And so when Exit Music was released, remember that I cannot stress this enough. I came out of retirement in my 30s, like with absolutely no sense of expectation. I had no idea what I could possibly have achieved by doing this, but I decided to just release Exit Music. I'm in my like mid 30s. I have a full-time job. This is how I'm paying for the album. And Exit Music comes out. The world is completely shut down. Absolutely nobody cares. Nobody has the mental capacity to even pretend to care that I put out a new record. For a long time, for many, many years. I mean, at this point, there's a program called Spotify that shows you. It's basically like internet radio. It's where everybody uploads all their music, and it streams, and it shows you how many people are listening to your music every month, how many monthly listeners you have. And I think for the last several years, since Exit Music came out, I've averaged anywhere between 0 to 2 listeners a month. So when I say that Exit Music was released to little to no fanfare, I could not be more accurate. And when I also say that when I say that I quit music in 2014, imagine how I felt releasing Exit Music to nothing. Not even just to no audience, but to no society. Society did not exist when Exit Music came out. And when I tell you that then, I really doubled down and quit music. I would hope you would believe me. Although, of course, I'm here finishing up this series by talking about one more record, right? But if I felt defeated in 2014, the journey it took for me to climb a mountain again in order to put out Exit Music, for it to be released into the void of nothing that COVID had turned society into, I tell you, there was simply nothing left for me to want or try to achieve. I didn't even take it personal. I just laughed. I looked in a mirror and I laughed and I thought, that's fitting. That's fitting. Only I could release an album. Only I could make it a thing where I am trying to end my story. And it's like this great story I'm trying to tell, and I end it. Here's the big finale. Here's the Return of the Jedi moment, only for it to just be, received by no one. So I really, really quit music. Exit Music was, in fact, the title was written in order to imply this was it. So years go by, right? Time goes by. 2020, everything gets worse. Trump's in his presidency. The country is split right down the middle. Everybody's fighting. The election is happening in late 2020. You've got Trump accusing the Democrats of rigging the election. You've got literal machines driving out and picking up mailboxes, like the blue postal USPS or post office boxes, and just like throwing them into these like dumpsters. Like it was so surreal. It's 2022 right now, and to try to even describe what 2020 was like living through it, it's still impossible. I look forward to the books written about it 20 to 40 to 100 years from now. The way that society views this time in our lives. But to be living through it, it was easily the most tiresome and exhausting thing that I had ever experienced. And right now I'm 37. In my 37 years of life, I've simply never experienced anything so mentally exhausting. To constantly be watching the news, constantly being just bombarded with wild accusations, fear, one side blaming the other side, on like the elections happening, and it's just the most ridiculous spectacle. COVID is being politicized. The Black Lives Matter protests started in May of that year. There was so much social turmoil. George Floyd, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Those are the big ones that stand out. I mean, it was constant. It was never ending. And the reason I bring all this up is because you start to think, you start to get in this world where you think like it couldn't possibly get worse. There's no way it could get worse, right? January 2021 happens. Biden wins. The transfer of power is supposed to happen. And, of course, you know that a bunch of insane protesters, quote-unquote, stormed the Capitol and broke in, and they threatened to, murder Mike Pence, the vice president. And, again, I'm not a historian, and I'm certainly not trying to make this series based around my music in any way political. So I'll save that for another time. But as a society, we were just watching things. It was like doubling down, constant chaos. Trump lost, refused to accept it. Recordings have been released at this point of him just like threatening senators and just trying to strong arm like public officials into lying. The January 20th hearings, like the court, it's in court right now. It's all over TV. We're still living in it. COVID is still happening, and while all of this fucking hurricane of chaos is happening, winter is upon us, and on February 15th, it starts to snow in Texas. And when I tell you that that's in South Texas, in San Antonio, it's an anomaly. In the episode about the Great 85 album, when I talk about the music, there's a song we wrote called The Great Snow of 85, because in 2010, the last time it had snowed in San Antonio was 1985. And then it snowed again in 2011, just a little bit. We got a little bit of a flurry of snow in 2017, December of 2017, one night. And then in February of 2021, we were hit with a snowstorm that lasted an entire week. And when I say that this is one of the great catastrophes of my lifetime, I'm putting that on top of the year of COVID, on top of 2020. 2021 actually got worse. And again, like, you have to remember, this is San Antonio, and we're all just fucking exhausted from the year of 2020 dealing with COVID and all of the politics that we've been just like forced to have an opinion on. And suddenly this snowstorm hits, and immediately the power grid in Texas goes out. No power, freezing weather, no food. And we can't go out and help each other. We can't go to our neighbors. We can't leave our homes because of fucking COVID. We're being told that we couldn't go help our neighbors. We couldn't leave the house. We couldn't help our neighbors. We couldn't do anything. We were just stuck. And it was like we were left to die. There, to this day, it has been over a year since that storm happened. To this day, there's been no explanation as to why the power grid turned off. There's been absolutely zero accountability from the Texas government, the people in charge of this. To this day, it is this giant embarrassment in just like not just American history, but like Texas history. Hundreds of thousands of people were put out. People were dying. People just froze to death, starving. There was no water. There was no food for days. And the only reason that we all survived, and I'm not even kidding, the only reason that we all survived is because the snow just stopped one day. And you want to talk about bleak. Imagine on like it being like a Tuesday and it's just been snowing for days and it's not going to stop, and you have no heat and you have no power or water or food. And you're looking at like the little bit of internet you have, like the cell phone, like wireless whatever 3G shit that your phone is able to get. And on the weather app, it's showing that by Saturday the weather is going to be sunny and in the 70s. But it's Tuesday, and you just have to like sit there and watch and wait and hope that you make it. It was so fucking bleak and weird. It was pure chaos. I remember a very distinct feeling of being at the home that I owned. I was working. We were not able to go into the office. I remember taking that morning meeting on Zoom from my bed because I had no heat and it was freezing outside, and so I was in my sweater and under the blankets. And there was no internet, so the signal wasn't strong enough for me to video chat. So I was like on my audio portion of Zoom. And later that day, I was doing some work at my computer. My power had it came on every couple hours. I got like 30 minutes or something. I was checking emails, and I just remember stopping and staring out the window and watching, like I'm looking at the snow just falling like in like a flurry. It's like a flurry of snow. It's just pounding the ground. It's been happening for days at this point. And there was a very I don't know how to describe like a very present moment. I know that like sort of in like Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now book, that's what's described as like almost like transcendental awareness, to be so suddenly enveloped in the concept of being right now, like present right now. And that's one of those moments I look back on, and it's like a spark in my life where I look back and remember the moment of staring out the window, watching the snow fall down, and just being so highly aware that this life was beyond my capability of understanding. The snow passed, and around this time, for the most part, we were still in lockdown. It was still highly sort of like, suggested that you don't go out. COVID was still doing its thing. And in order to cope, my friends and I, a couple of my friends and I, had a weekly video game session where we would all call each other on I think Discord, and we would play Smash Brothers together, Super Smash Brothers for the Switch. Jigglypuff Gang, Rise Up. And in that group, and again, remember these are friends from all over the country. So in that group, somehow Ryan and Brandon Guerra came back in. Remember, Ryan and Brandon were the drummer and sort of piano player / violinist of my much earlier albums. Specifically, Boy and the Bird was the one that the three of us did together, and then Brandon and I did The Raccoon until Brandon went off to go to touring like a national drumline, and then over the course of the next 10 years just sort of became like a very prominent jazz drummer in South Texas. He studied at UT. Not UT, Texas State. He lived in San Marcos. He lived in Austin. He sort of traveled the world, and I know that he and his wife had planned on leaving and living in Los Angeles in order to pursue his sort of like lifetime passion of drumming. And that was right when COVID hit, and so long story short, they ended up settling in San Antonio, but lived throughout all of COVID and was just sort of going through it as we all were. And in these video game meetings we had every Sunday, suddenly I was talking to Brandon again. Brandon and I hadn't spoken in 10 years. And so, it started with whatever. It was just there were like 6 of us, maybe more or less at a time, usually in the chat, and we would just sort of casually, a lot of the discussion was always around COVID and just like politics in general, as was right for the time. And Brandon had just sort of like, at this time, Brandon had become a sort of like lo-fi beats influencer on Instagram. He was really big into the brand of synths by the company Teenage Engineering. He had actually become a sort of de facto beta tester for their machines, and so specifically the synth called the OP1. He had built a very sort of engaging platform off of his videos and like his sort of tutorials on the OP1, and he had given, he taught lessons virtually and things like that. He was just really in that world, and his whole life had become lo-fi beats and also jazz drumming, and that was just the thing he was doing. It was very cool. I was not doing anything musically related. It was the farthest thing from my mind, but for some reason, and I don't know why, for some reason there was a day where Brandon posted a video of him playing something, and then a friend of his took the video and then added like some like keyboards to it, kind of like just like stitching it in the way that they do on like TikTok videos and stuff. And then Brandon posted that too, and he got a great reception. And I thought, like, you know what, I could do that. And on a whim, I took the same video, except it had the added. Now it was added with keys, and then I sort of stitched my vocals to it, and I sang like these kind of like really high falsettos that just sort of sat. It was only like 10 seconds of music, but I added these kind of like high falsetto, like stacked layers of harmonies, and I just kind of sent that to Brandon. I didn't know what the fuck it was for. I just kind of did it. It was very impulsive, and didn't get much. Brandon was like, "Hey man, that's really cool." I didn't know what to expect, but I was like, okay, well, whatever. If it felt good, just reminding myself that I could still make music. And as the months went on, in our Sunday video game, meetings continued. At one point, Brandon, right when COVID really started to lift, there was a point in 2021 around like May where COVID was sort of taking a downward tick, and I got a text from Brandon one day, and he just said, "Hey, I have the studio set up at my house. It would be great to catch up. And why don't you come over one day and we'll grab some tacos and we'll just sort of jam a little bit and see what's just see what's going on. And I thought, okay, that's cool. I was a little nervous. Again, like, hadn't talked to this guy in 20 years. The last time I'd seen him, he was like 17, 18 years old. And now here he was in his 30s, married. One of the great jazz drummers in San Antonio and like South Texas. As great as everybody always knew he could be. Again, remember, when I was playing with Brandon, he was like 17. And at that time, and still even to this moment, he was just the best musician that I ever like sat and played with. Like he, you like to think that it's because of your chemistry with a person that it works. Like I like to think that Brandon and I just always balanced each other out, but I cannot deny the fact that he was always so talented that he had the ability to just sort of like meet me where I needed to be met. Maybe he was doing all the heavy lifting in regard to like our ability to play together. I wouldn't doubt it, but I wouldn't doubt it at all. But what I do remember feeling was that Brandon was the musician that I always felt most comfortable and almost like the word I would even say is safe with performing. It was like when him and I were up there, if I knew that he was backing me up, I felt like I was better. And again, huge testament to Brandon as a musician, because that's probably the best compliment you can give another musician, is just like when you're playing with me, I'm better and things are better. And again, I had at this point had fully retired from music, like in an embarrassingly so, definitively almost. And so all of these things kind of going into seeing Brandon again for the first time, to talk to him again, to have a conversation with the guy for the first time in a decade. It was exciting, and it was, to say the least, it was exciting. So I drove over to his house, and we had tacos from Garcia's, which that's what you do. You eat Garcia's and you sit and you chat. And Brandon and I kind of caught up. We discussed how he had been given the opportunity. He had intended to move to LA and couldn't because of COVID, and I had lived in LA and had moved back and had sort of gone through my experience here in San Antonio, and we kind of commiserated on trying to like exist in a city that doesn't necessarily have the foundation for like a arts and cultural scene that competes with other scenes nationally, like especially in the shadow of a place like Austin. But at the end of our meal, we talked and we sort of like remembered some of the good times and we caught up in that regard. And then at the end of it, he said, "Why don't you come out and check out my studio?" And I was like, "Okay." So we came out here where I'm sitting right now, and he's got a cool little setup. He's got a bunch of synths, and he's got his piano and his drums, and it's a cool little, just a small little space. And we were sitting and looking at the posters on his wall, the same ones I'm staring at now. He's got a poster of Bon Iver and a couple of Miyazaki posters, one for Spirited Away, another for My Neighbor Totoro. And we were just kind of living in this space, talking about the different types of things that influence us as people and the art that we really are into right now. And when it came to Bon Iver, we talked about the album, 22 A Million, which to both of us is sort of like the peak of Bon Iver's creativity and sort of like discography. And we both talked about the song Creeks. Creeks is just in my opinion, just one of the most beautiful things that's been released in popular music for, the last maybe even in my lifetime, if I had to stack it all up together. Brandon felt very much the same way, and he was like, "Oh, check out this thing. It's like a cool vocoder thing that I have that I think Justin maybe uses, or it can do the same thing." And he pulled it out, and we started to kind of play around, and he was like trying to recreate Creeks, and he did something, and I said, "Do that again." And he did it again vocally through this processor. And I was like, "Record that real quick." And he did. It was like one note, and then we took that, and I was like, okay, pitch it down a little bit. So chop it, pitch it, and like it him and I started to build, like we just started putting ideas down, like so fluidly. Like, it was like there was absolutely no pause between the last time we saw each other and the recording session for the Raccoon, and then suddenly we're sitting in here, and like within minutes it was like, dude, record that. What if you do this? And he's doing it, and we're like, yo, that's cool. And then he added a beat, and then I added some vocals, and then suddenly, within like 30 minutes to maybe like an hour of being out here, we had a whole song. We had a whole like 3.5 minute song, the bones of it. And we're sitting there, like, it was like, it happened so fast that when it wasn't until like kind of like at the end of it, brain was like, all right, you know, I gotta go get ready for this thing. And we're sitting there kind of laughing, and it's like, did we just write a whole song like in you know, a couple of minutes? And it was this cool kind of like lo-fi beats with some, you know, a little bit of jazz and a little bit of piano, and it was very chill. And I asked him if he could send it to me, like just, you know, share the file with me so I could kind of go home and listen to it. And I took it home and just started working on vocals for it. I had all these ideas, and a couple of days later, I brought it back to him, and I like called him, and I was like, bro, I'm outside your house. Just come sit in the car and listen to what I did. And I need you to tell me if this is something you like or if it's just completely off base. And, you know, Brandon, this poor guy, like, he's like married and he like has a life, and he's just like, okay. Like, he's like, you're outside my house right now? And I was like, yes, just come outside. Don't ask questions. And so he comes out to the car, and I was like, just listen to this. And I played this song that we had written, and I had my vocal ideas on it, and I played it. And what the song was at that point I had called it Cold. And I had written it entirely about the freeze. You know, and the lyrics start with like, when the sun goes down, looks like we're all on our own out in the cold. And it's that chorus though, like the "It's so cold outside." Like it's that part that I was like, Brandon's either gonna get this or he's not. But this is the song. This is like everything that we just experienced. I mean, we were a couple of months out of the freeze, and Brandon immediately heard it and immediately was like, this is it. And it was, I don't know if it was then, but it was kind of like quickly after that we realized that we were going to write a song about the freeze. So I'm going to go into the tracks now and just kind of like, just sort of go over, and now, you know, I'll do the kind of summary of the record. Let's see here. Here we go. Okay. So to start, the album title, DEATHBLOOM. DEATHBLOOM is when the local sort of agave plant that's very much like part of the kind of agriculture of South Texas, when this plant, which can live for a very long time, when it's prematurely killed, usually by like weather or like a freeze, for instance, it shoots out this giant stalk. And I'm talking like these plants are like low, they're kind of like small plants, like maybe can get a couple of feet tall, like when it's like standing at their highest, right? Like uncurled leaves. And then when they're dying, they shoot out this stalk that can get up to like 20 to 30 feet high. And it has these incredibly beautiful buds, like these flowers on it. And that's what's called the death bloom. It's literally like in the moments of death, it shows this side of itself that could never like be shown to the world unless it were tragically dying. It's so bittersweet. And even the word DEATHBLOOM is a contradiction, right? And so Brandon and I Brandon is really, I mean, you know, he's just one of those guys that's like really into plants, and he was so sort of invested into like the deeper deeper facts, like I guess of that whole like the horticulture and things, that he was just always talking about this thing called the death bloom. And I remember during the early sessions we used to, you know, sometimes we would practice, we would walk, we would take walks around his neighborhood, and he would kind of show just like different death blooms, like different places where these plants had just sort of died, and each death bloom is different. Each one is like a different color, different height, different shape. And it became apparent very quickly that like Death Bloom was the sort of perfect summary of this record, right? Like who we were, being born from the kind of like collapse, not only of the way that society had been sort of propped up until recently, but also just like who we were in the world after the freeze had happened. And so Death Bloom became the sort of like spiritual kind of like muse, like the kind of anchor of this record, which was very much intentionally created to tell stories and sort of like capture the atmosphere and energy of living in that freeze. And so, introduction, A Chance of Snow. This song was written alongside the first real song, the next track, which is called Power. We really, again, like we decided to make this kind of concept record, and so there's a lot of maybe like theatrical elements to it. This one starting the record with this very beautiful Rhodes piano introduction, which are the chords to Power. And also we have like, you know, sounds of someone walking through the snow, and so we're quickly introducing the atmosphere of snow, and that we're moving through snow. And so once we get into Power, this is where just sort of like off to the races, big energy song, probably the highest sort of energy we have on the record, which was very intentional again too. We wanted people listening to immediately be hooked into the energy. And this song specifically is mostly Brandon, if I'm not mistaken. It might be all Brandon. He wrote the piano part, and I remember him doing a lot of work at the time. You could go on Instagram and see almost like every day, or at least maybe once a week, you could watch Brandon in his studio learning and practicing the chords for Power. I remember that a lot. It was just something that he was constantly teaching himself to do. And so it's Brandon playing the Rhodes, and it's Brandon playing all the instruments, if I'm not mistaken. This, you know, just truly one of the most talented people in the world, in my opinion. But you know, he's playing the OP1 is the drums, and when we were building this thing out, this is interestingly enough, this is the last song that we ended up getting the vocals for, because we just wanted this song to be so good. I almost, and remember, this is the first time that I've intentionally released music in years at this point, and I was nervous. I was actually pretty anxious on this one. I remember it took all the way until the very, very end of the whole like 6 months of us making this record. I think recording the vocals to Power was the very last thing that we got. And so the music speaks for itself, of course. Like, it's a testament to Brandon being super talented. And from a lyrical and vocal standpoint, what we had here was me just sort of jumping right into trying to capture the energy of being just someone like seemingly caught in the middle of a lot of chaotic energy, which is like we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with what has become a recession. There's no money. There's no leaning on our neighbor. There's no semblance of society, and now there's no power. And so the title "Power" is a it's a double entendre of sorts, because it's supposed to imply like the question, who's going to be in charge when the power's out. Well, we're of course speaking literally, we're speaking about the actual power, like the electricity, but also at the same time, the government was refusing to take accountability for what was happening and what had happened. So it was like, well, who's in charge when the fucking people in power aren't taking, aren't owning up to it, right? So immediately I wanted to lay down as heavy a challenge as I could to kind of let the listener know that we're allowed to feel like we got shorted in this situation. I mean, aside from having to just exist through these horrific situations, the people who are literally employed by us to help and to protect us have to this day never owned up, never offered anything. We still have the same stupid ass power grid, this busted ass power grid that has not improved at all. Nothing was done to fix or change anything. It's infuriating. The way I feel about it right now, like you're listening to me talk about it, imagine what it felt like as we were going through it, right? On top of every other horrible thing happening. So Power is this big sort of like introduction to the record. It's this big kind of statement, like kick the door down and listen. And at the end of Power, it has this really great, Brandon is this jazz drummer. I'm very much in love with a sort of abstract experimental sound in my own sort of production work. And from a production standpoint, again, this is Brandon and I co-produced this entire record together. Like every decision that was made between the two of us sitting in this studio looking at the screen. And so at the end of the song, you're hearing me asking the question, like, who's going to be in charge when the power's out? I'm repeating that over and over again. And then there's this like electric effect, like this effect where it sounds like a rattling or like a shortage, and then my voice cuts out. And then you're just hearing Brandon sort of doing this like wild kind of improvisational drumming. And as that's going on and it's kind of winding down, well, then in comes this now like new source of sound, which is supposed to sort of represent the constant background hum of video, like sound, like the news or watching your phone or any content, which we've all just become hyper just fixated on since the COVID days. So here's now this humming, and this humming is now coming in, and it's like the only thing that's like it's just in the background on this loop, right? And now here comes the song Change in the Weather. And again, this was a song that when Brandon first played he was playing around on the piano and he sort of played it. It was another thing where I said, okay, let's hold that, like whatever you just did, do it again. And then he would keep playing it, and then I would sit there, and then I would start humming, and him and I would kind of stop, and we'd say like, how does this make us feel? And I remember distinctly he and I both felt that the song, like the piano riff, like the main intro piano riff of this track, made us feel like it felt to play the ice cavern in Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, if that makes sense to anybody listening. when you're in the ice cavern of Ocarina of Time, that's how this piano riff made us feel. And so for a long time, the working track, like the working title of the song, was just called Ice. That's how we referred to it, up until the like submission to the mastering, where you had to input like the official title. The song was just called Ice. And this one is my favorite for so many reasons. Not my favorite. This one's a favorite for so many reasons. Not to, and I'm gonna say that about every song, because every song on this record is like my favorite. But what I love about this song specifically is the Radiohead-esque introduction of bass and drum in the chorus. The way that it kind of like halfway through reminds me of Pyramid Song from Amnesiac off the Radiohead album. And of course, Jason, a friend of Brandon's, his name is Jason. He's the guy who played the bass clarinet in this track. And again, another reference to Legend of Zelda. When Brandon and I were thinking about what kind of musicians do we want to bring in on this, when we were listening to this, we thought like, the sound of like when the owl comes around and he like, there's an owl in Ocarina of Time that just sort of like is always around giving helpful hints, and it always has that like it's the owl's theme. We were really into that. We were both like, we need that kind of vibe on this track. And Brandon had Jason. I guess they're like pretty good friends, and they played together a lot. And Brandon, to say that Jason is a talented musician is underselling in every sense of the word. When Jason came in and tracked the bass clarinet for Change in the Weather and then the saxophones for the song Mother in the same session, we're sitting here watching him do it. I have simply never seen another musician play like that before. I've been making and playing music for, 20 years. I've opened for the biggest names in the business. I've seen legends in all genres. I've shared a stage with dudes from, the Dirty Dozen brass band, and I've seen the best of the best all over the world. And when I tell you that watching Jason play the way that he plays, I've never seen anyone play like that before. That's not hyperbole. Jason is easily the most talented, probably, musician I've ever been in a room with. And it was in this moment where I'm sitting and watching that it really dawned on me the blessing that I had suddenly had been bestowed upon me because of my connection to Brandon. Because Brandon and I were doing this record together, I was suddenly being introduced to some of the most talented people that I had ever seen in my life. And I was being brought into the world that Brandon is like a fixture in, which is the world of like South Texas jazz. I have just always been like, I went from folk to sort of like indie rock to wildly conceptual art pieces to what was a very sad attempt at becoming like a Justin Timberlake style pop star. Exit Music was again kind of putting my foot back into the door of like the sort of like more artistic concept record, and now here I was making this jazz record with these musicians who are so wildly talented, beyond my abilities as a musician to even try to like. We don't even talk the same. I don't speak the same language as these guys that Brandon just has these kind of like casual, professional and personal relationships with. Jason's just a perfect example of that. This dude came in and just absolutely, like, you're just seeing sparks fly out of his horn as he's sitting there and playing. So anyway, the most of the stuff that he did. So like the bass clarinet solo that he takes at the end of Change in the Weather, that's just one take. That's just him sitting down, hearing it, and playing. And it's the most just beautiful and perfect and like deeply rich sound, and it's so like to accompany the music that we're making, you know. And we have a bunch of other things that he added on there too. That I think he had like an alto sax or a soprano sax or something. But this dude, just a true master of his instrument, which is always just the highest pleasure of mine, is to sit and watch any person be a master of anything. And sitting and watching, just even for maybe like an hour or two, watching Jason just play the way that he plays and write the way that he writes, it was such a thrill. And so Change in the Weather to me is special because for not for anything else, just the level of artistry being brought in by like a musician like Jason, and the references that Brandon and I really leaned on, which were heavily inspired by Ocarina of Time through Legend of Zelda. And so, and then of course the very one thing that we both really love is that Brandon on the outro, the song ends on this very like, it's very kind of dark and it's kind of like fading out, and then it ends on this like kind of hopeful note. Like the way it ends is this very hopeful sort of we always laugh at that. We laugh, you know. So it's just one of those things as the writers and producers, you get to like throw in little things that keep you entertained. You have to do that when it's your music, and it's your project or whatever. So that's kind of one of, every time I hear that song and hear that last little note, little flutter at the end, it always makes me smile. Ear Caught, Brandon just absolutely going wild on the drums again. And then this is the first time that we introduce the actual news stories, clips and things from like the San Antonio experience. Just, you know, these are actual news clips that we were just like taking off of YouTube and chopping them up and whatever. This one in particular hurt us because we did not manipulate it enough, and the algorithm, I guess like the AI that is looking for copywritten material, flagged this one immediately when we uploaded it to Spotify, and to this day has never counted a single play. I mean, we probably had about 1,000 plays on this one. You know, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of plays, and it just doesn't count. It just sits there, and it's all the way at the bottom of all the music we've ever written. It just has a 0 next to it because it does not count this song towards any, you know, minuscule amount of money that they would be giving us. We're not allowed to collect any money off this one. And so for a long time, we were kind of like, it was kind of touch and go whether or not they were going to pull down the whole record because of this. And so we had a backup plan in place where Brandon was going to actually be reading the news story so that it wasn't an actual copywritten thing. But, you know, as it stands, we never received any money off this song, but they let us keep the record up and you can still listen to it. So someday that might change. But for now, the original version of DEATHBLOOM, and then especially Ear Caught, has just a snippet of the San Antonio news. And then that goes right into the song Cold. Again, Cold, the very first thing that Brandon and I wrote. It is I would say, tent pole of this record, mostly because of the story we're telling. It could not be any more literal than the chorus of this song, which is where it's so cold outside. The trumpet on this one is played by another friend of Brandon's. His name is Adrian. Adrian is like he has like a doctorate in trumpet, and I always say, like, do you have any idea how good at trumpet you are if you have a fucking like a PhD in trumpet? And so Adrian just came in and just caught the vibe absolutely perfectly, just sits right on it, just gave us everything we needed. And it was just I wasn't in the session for this one. Adrian came in and tracked it with Brandon. I think Adrian was coming through town to play a show. and just happened to stop by. Brandon got him to come to the studio before the show in order to lay down the horn for this track. It's the perfect complement. It's exactly what we wanted to accomplish with this sort of like lo-fi jazz. That lo-fi jazz is the way that the album has been described specifically by outlets. I think when the record came out, it was actually hosted on the front page of like Bandcamp, which was just wonderful. And the way they described it, it was like they called it like a lo-fi electronic jazz dreamscape. They called it like, they referred to it as like dreamy. And it's such an honor to me. Brandon has a bit of a hang up on it because to Brandon, the word jazz is a very literal description of something. It's a very sort of like approach to music. Like if you're not playing that very specific type of sound, then it shouldn't be considered jazz. I'm thankfully not like, I don't lose anything in any community for being hyperbolic in regard to the description of this record. So I just like really love calling it an indie electronic jazz lo-fi record. And so anyway, Cold. This is another one where Brandon wrote most of the music. I'm trying to remember. I know that he wrote the beat. He's the one on the vocoder, which is the song starts. That sound that the song starts on, those two notes that play throughout the whole song, that's Brandon playing the vocoder, which is the very first thing that he and I did the first time that we hung out, where he was just trying to, recreate Creeks by Bon Iver, and then we chopped up a little bit of it and then just resampled it. All of it, and then you've got him playing, I don't quite remember which synth he's playing, but he's doing something to manipulate all of that kind of chaos at the end. And then you've got Adrian on the trumpet, and then you've got me doing all of my different vocal takes. Cold is just one of the highlights of like my writing career. Like to be a part of this song makes me so happy. I love this song. It's exactly the type of music that I feel, that I listen to, is the type of thing that I want to vibe to. I think that chorus, "It's so cold outside," it being so literal just gives such a strong foundation for people to sit with it. Like it's so easy to like it because it's not hiding what the message is. And, it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing for any person to learn how to write simply and effectively. I don't care what anybody says. I truly believe, and I've learned enough, and I've been taught enough, and I've like studied enough to know that it's like to be truly great at something is to do it in a way that can be received by all. Like high concept is obviously a very studied and a very just like it's a very wonderful thing to aspire to, kind of like high concept, high difficulty. It takes talent, of course. But to whittle away into excess and find a place where you can say a message that resonates and just like sits and can be easily received, it's a very challenging thing to do. And so what I do believe that to say something as simple as "it's so cold outside" and it's effective and it still tells the story and it like really, it really still holds its merit artistically is as a singer and as a writer, it's a moment of pride for me. So I really do love that song a lot for a lot of reasons. Wilted Gardens. So Cold ends, it goes right into the Wilted Gardens remix. This is actually the song Cold, and then it's just chopped and then slowed down. And then it's more of Adrian playing. So it's kind of like the outro to Cold, because it actually is Cold, but just like a piece of it is chopped and flipped. And now I'm singing just about the death of our flowers, which Brandon and I, that was kind of like one of the big things. That was like sort of one of the great sort of like topics to commiserate over is that both of us lost so much of our gardens and so many people lost so much. That was where the discussion about the original kind of like DEATHBLOOM topic came up, was discussing how badly like our plants and things had been like destroyed by the weather. I personally had a tangerine tree that I fucking loved. I loved this tangerine tree it was in the front yard of my house. It was bearing abundantly so much fruit. This thing was just the love of my life. If you were to be following me on any social media at the time, you would just see the way that it's like, the way that people post about like a pet or a loved one. It's like, this is how I was showing my sort of like just my connection to this tangerine tree. Like, I loved this tree so much, and the freeze just destroyed it. It, to this day, it's been years almost. It's been a long time, and the tree's just dead. It's the saddest thing. It just breaks my heart to think about it, and there's nothing that anybody could have done. Like, I know that I could have like tried to save it, but it was freezing for like over a week. Like, the tree didn't stand a chance. That no citrus trees like made it. That's just, they're not meant to be in freezing weather. But this tree died, and it was dead, and so that really weighed heavily on my heart. And so this song, Wilted Gardens, is again kind of like the way that Cold is the sort of tent pole of like musically for the record, and then Wilted Gardens is the tent pole for the message, and kind of like the sort of like a reminder to Brandon and I of like how this all started. This whole thing started because him and I were discussing the way that our plants were killed during the storm, and so yeah, I like, again, the way that this kind of has a very sort of like drum and bass, like slowed down, almost like chopped and screwed, without the screwed part. But beautiful, my flowers, they were beautiful, and I just had to take them away. Walked through my garden and I said, oh no. It's short. It's a short little message, but it was very much written about the death of my tangerine tree, and I'm glad that I got to pay homage to it, because it was a thing that I really loved a lot. The track Mother. Okay, so Mother is my favorite. I've said that several times. Mother's my favorite song on this record. It's the type of music that I, on my deathbed, will say, like, I feel lucky that I got to be a part of a song like Mother. And I'll explain sort of how the song came about. So, like I told you originally, Brandon has a social media page where he just sort of like has for many years. He would just sort of post these like little musical ideas that he would have, and it would be a combination of like a synth or like the OP1 or some teenage engineering machine that they sent him to test, and then he would also couple that with maybe playing the piano, or he would play his drums, and it was always very cool. And so while we were sort of starting this record, I was going through all of his videos because I'm obsessed. I'm just a freak in that way. So I'm going through years worth of things that he's posted, and I am looking for any ideas that he's ever done that we can repurpose. And so the drum line, which we laugh, it's like that's the way that he plays the drums in Mother is, in my opinion, as sort of like iconic as like, what's that Guns N' Roses song? Welcome to the Jungle, maybe? I don't know. Some like Brandon's drums in Mother is a riff. It's like a riff that is sort of like supposed to be remembered with the song. That's how we feel about it. Anytime him and I are messing around, and I'll be like, play the drums for Mother, and he'll just like go right into it. So anyway, he had done this before with like different music, and so I caught, like I took that particular clip that he had done like years ago, and I was like, play this again. And at the same time, Brandon was showing me a database. He had like a bunch of music that he had worked with, like some keyboard player who, again, just like of the same equivalence of skill and talent of his other friends. I do not remember who played these keys particularly, but like it was just like 30 minutes of electric piano of some like master savant that this guy just like made 30 minutes of music and just kind of like sent it to Brandon and was like, do whatever you want with this. And he had been sitting on it, and it just happened to be up while we were in this session, and I was listening to it, and, you know, just the way that I kind of, like, my production brain does, like, I heard a few different snippets, and I was like, okay, give me 5 minutes, and, like, I chopped them, and, like, I took it and placed them and rearranged them, and I was like, all right, set it to a BPM, and I was like, Brandon, play those drums. And we did it, and then we put it all together, and that's what Mother was like chopped up samples of electric piano that his friend had sent a long time ago, and then the drums that Brandon had written for like an Instagram post from like 2019 or 2018. But when you combine them together, it had this beautiful, like just this beautiful bed of music. And we quickly put all the other elements together. Like we kind of, in the way that Brandon and I do, like we worked out an idea, like a skeleton of a song really quick. And, you know, over the course of time, Brandon, of course, like would come in and he wrote the bass parts on like his little pad and all the other things too. Like Brandon would kind of fill it in with all of his like toys and ideas and things. The lyrics and the vocals for this one, I think, again, I'm very proud of them just from a sense of the storytelling. Like, Mother, can you pray for us? They're saying that outside is dangerous, and I know that it's wrong. Like, Mother, can you pray for us? They're saying that outside is dangerous. Why is everybody so afraid of us? They're saying that outside is dangerous. All of this at the same time, it's just like it's just talking about the storm, like the freeze is happening. It's dangerous. COVID's happening. The political discourse. Everybody's so afraid. Everybody's saying that everybody else is dangerous and COVID's dangerous and we can't go outside. And like, it was so heavy, dude. If you were here, you know. If you weren't here, that's the word to describe how it felt. It was heavy. Heavy, heavy, heavy. Everything was so heavy. It still is heavy, man. But in those moments, like, just trying to get it out through song, it was heavy. And then and everything kind of ends with me saying like, and I know that it's wrong. Like underneath all of it, I'm just like trying to relay that like we all felt like we were just being overwhelmed with bullshit, and like so many people had so many questions, nobody was answering them. All of the people in power, all of the people that we've elected to lead us in these times were just completely absent. And if they weren't absent, they were only showing up in order to point their finger at who we should be blaming. Nobody blamed, nobody took any credibility. It was, oh gosh, getting worked up. Mother, another moment where we take the sample from the news, and this is one that I actually went in and kind of like manipulated. I played around with this one in my spare time and brought it in. And then we get into the outro, which is like the kind of like Jason comes back and plays the saxophone here. And again, it's just like the beauty of it is that we tracked Brandon's drums first without Jason here. Like Brandon tracked his drums that first day, like when we were putting all this together. And again, like me getting to sit in the room and watch like a master at work. It's just you hear like there's a lot going on because of Jason's saxophone playing. Like it's really exciting. But when you listen deeper, like underneath the saxophone playing, you're listen to the drums as Brandon is just blazing through his time. Like just fills and rolls and just like sitting in the pockets of things. Like this is this beautiful moment where Brandon just gets to like just live within the joy of being a musician, right? Like so much of this record is planned and precise and intentional, and it's like for one moment all of that gets thrown out and you just get to hear Brandon play with like the joy of someone who is just getting to like, it's like riding his bike, you know? It's like a cyclist just riding for the thrill of it. And it's like this is Brandon playing drums for the thrill of playing drums. And there was nothing more just like wonderful, in my opinion, again, than to just watch a master be a master at something. And so then Brandon had all of that, and so then Jason comes in, and of course, like again, let me reiterate, I have never seen anyone play the way that I saw like this dude play in this studio, in this room for those couple of hours, the way that he was just listening and playing and kind of like doing the thing. But he did like a call and response almost to like Brandon's drums, where he is just so like it's I swear to God, when people people responded to this record and they were like, oh, I bet you guys just fucking sat in that room and y'all played off each other and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, these are two, like, masters who were able to record these things differently, separately, at different times. And it was just simply, you know, again, Brandon laying the foundation on his own to a click track, and then with the piano samples, and then Jason playing off that. And, man, that ending of Mother brings me so much joy. So much joy. It's just, if you're a fan of music, then you'll appreciate the ending of Mother, in my opinion. It's just two wonderful musicians on top of, like, you know, again, a very talented keyboard player where his work has been sampled in and brought in. It's just the best. It's the best of music, right? Like that jam at the end, and we just sort of intentionally faded out because, you know, it could go forever. It's kind of giving that like just like a callback to just like live music in general, the wild spirit of live jazz music. Yeah, Mother. I love this track so much, so much. 100 Hours of Freezing. This one's cool. Interestingly enough, this is the only song that I play guitar on. Again, I've played guitar on every record I've ever. I don't know if I played it on Gentleman Streets, but this is the only one where I'm actually playing on this album an instrument. Really, Brandon played so much of the. I think Brandon had to have played like 99% of the music on this record. The guitar is like my one thing where I can be like, I was there. I played music too. I played on it. So I this was a little riff that I wrote, and I brought it to Brandon, and of course, you know, like every other thing is Brandon, drums and keys and all this stuff, and we put another news story on top of it, just again to kind of fill in the sort of unease of, like, we're kind of building a sort of feeling here of unease of listening again to like the newscasters talking about how it's been 100 straight hours of freezing weather and it's a new record and blah, blah, blah. This one, thankfully, we manipulated enough to where it did not get flagged. Spotify considered this an original piece of work because of how much work we did manipulating it. And I know that was really like Brandon tooling around with a lot of his little knobs and dials and dealies. And now, as we're sort of like getting into kind of the last chapter of the album, first it goes into the song Tomorrow. I won't tell the story as well as Brandon can, obviously, because this song is again, it's like 99% Brandon. The only part that I show up on is I'm the very first sample of like you hear like backwards speaking, and it's kind of like the transition between 100 hours freezing into tomorrow. The sample is me saying the words like all my flowers are dead. And it was very much like Brandon was like, he had this idea and he was just like, okay, say this, and then he flipped it, and that was how we transitioned out of 100 hours. And everything else after that is something that Brandon wrote. He wrote it on an airplane. It was just different samples of things, and it was kind of like a collage musically. And the really special thing about this song is that when Brandon wrote it, he sent it to an old professor of his and was like, I don't even remember if he asked the guy to play on it, but he just sent it to him, and it was just kind of like, what do you think of this? And the professor was like, let me add something to it. And this is a guy who like teaches saxophone at Texas State or something, right? Like this is, I could be saying that wrong. I'm pretty sure that's right. This was like an old friend / professor of Brandon's, who's like the head of the saxophone, whatever. Another doctor, like another PhD in an instrument. And so this guy took Brandon's track, and then all of those horns you hear is him putting his ideas down onto it and then just like sending it back and just being like, what do you think? When Brandon played this for me, Brandon sort of like, not cautiously, but just sort of like eased into, he was like, I've got this thing, tell me what you think. Cause like if you liked it, it'd be cool if we could use it. And I was like, all right, very, very curious at this point. And then he played it, and it was like I remember what life was like before I heard it. And then life was like after I heard it. I was so moved, like, we're clearly the song was at an advantage to be liked because I was listening to it in Brandon's studio with like these giant monitors, so I could really feel all the elements. But that song was so overwhelmingly powerful in its, I don't know, how long is it? 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Hey, 2:10, San Antonio. I didn't even get that. That song was so overwhelming. When I heard it the first time, I was like, it has to go on the record. Of course. And so tomorrow is this thing that Brandon wrote, and it's cool too. When it comes to sharing a record with someone, like co-producing it, co-writing, it's a lot of work to like. Sometimes it's work to try to figure out the credits of writing. And for the most part, everything here was split down the middle. Like Brandon and I are 50-50 on everything, except for Tomorrow. That's the only song on this record that Brandon has full credit for as a writer. And I couldn't be more proud. I mean, like, I just think it's such a wonderful, beautiful moment of music. And to have it on DEATHBLOOM is, in my opinion, such a blessing. Like, this, just like, I can't say enough about it. I love this little moment of music, and just the story of it, how like the professor guy just added these elements to it that just brought it to this other planet. It's the and it's the perfect segue out of like the sort of like first 3/4 of the record, and then this one segues into the song DEATHBLOOM. DEATHBLOOM is really. The story of DEATHBLOOM is really interesting. This is definitely the biggest song. I mean, we're talking like a lot of tracks, a lot of things go into this song, right? A lot of different pedals and effects, and I think vocally I've stacked, I don't know, anywhere between like 40 to maybe like 70 different voices of singing that sort of chorus. And if you really are familiar with the album, what you'll pick up on enough listens is that the words, day by day, we all wait for a sign that this is changing. Those are the same. So this is the last song on the record, and then those are the same words as the very first verse of Power, which is the first song. So it's a sort of full circle, full closed loop. Like the loop is closed now, where like the idea that we had in the beginning of the record has now like blossomed into this full on thing, right? Like it's just much bigger and multiplied by 1,000. The story behind DEATHBLOOM. So, you know, we can't say enough about this this is Brandon playing the piano. This is another thing that he was showing me he wrote, and I was like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. This has got to be on the album. So this is one of the original pieces of music that we had been writing to, and so we always knew that this is going to be like a really like wonderful moment. We saved this one for kind of like near the end of the album. I say that Power was the last thing, like the lyrics of, or the vocals of Power, the last thing that we did for the record, and that's kind of true. It's the last thing that we did together, because in December, remember, we were planning on releasing this album on the 1-year anniversary of The Freeze, which was February 15th. In December, as we're just getting ready, like we're kind of like, all right, we got 1 to 2 more sessions left. We're going to knock this out and start to get it ready to press. Brandon suddenly like gets COVID, like mid-December. And then when he comes back, I get COVID, like immediately. Like the day that he didn't have it, I had it. So we're talking about, and I'll kind of tell the story after that. Well, such to say that from like early December until about March, Brandon and I were never in the same room again for that entire 3 to maybe 3.5 to 4 month period of time, and we had not finished the record. So what we had here and what you're hearing, these are the scratch demo takes of my vocals that I recorded sitting on the ground of like, I'm like in my parents' attic tracking this shit. Never in a million years did I think that it was going to be what goes on the record, right? But like the way that we padded it out was that thankfully Brandon's brother Ryan happened to come in town. And because of like all the stuff with like COVID, Ryan had never even been to Brandon's house, right? So this is the first time that Ryan had ever actually seen Brandon's house and studio. This is his brother. Ryan had been stuck out in like North Carolina or wherever he was living. And Ryan, who's like an incredible singer, and I think Brandon too, like what they ended up doing was they ended up singing vocals as well, like to pad it out, to give it a little bit more muscle. And so Brandon and Ryan's voices are also in there too, which just adds to the like insane amount of vocals we have going on. But like the main stuff that you're hearing on this song are my scratch demo vocals that we were supposed to retrack. And then it just never happened. It couldn't happen. Brandon and I could not get into the same room from December until March. And the album came out in February. So this one was like really done virtually. Such a testament to like the times where the work was done in different spaces. And he and I would Zoom. Oh God, it was so funny. Like he and I had a couple of Zoom sessions where we were like fine tuning a reverb here or like a drum there or whatever. And a lot of DEATHBLOOM was done entirely. This is where Brandon just sort of took over the production because it was all done in his studio and I couldn't get back in here. And so at a certain point, he just kind of like closed off the last 10% of the production of the record, specifically on DEATHBLOOM, where he brought in Ryan, and then, you know, like he had Ryan play guitar, like you hear a little bit of guitar in there, Ryan playing at the end. But DEATHBLOOM was always this really big sort of dramatic finale, lots of fun to do, very maximalist when it comes to the production. And then it goes into the outro, this is the only song that actually has a third musician credited to it. This one, we got Colin Shook. Colin actually wrote this piano. And again, not even the same guy that wrote the stuff for Mother. This is another piece of music that the guy wrote like an hour's worth of piano and just sent it to Brandon and was like, you know, if you do anything you want with this. And we took it, we added more elements to it. We actually chopped up some of what he did and rearranged it in order to like make it do what we wanted it to do. And then we added that same sample of the footsteps in the snow in order to kind of like again close the loop of the story and the audio, like the experience of the album. This piano, in my opinion, and immediately like Brandon too, like we heard it and we were just like, this is the most beautiful thing. Like to have this on the record, to have this close the record, is such a gift. More than a gift, it's a blessing. It is as a musician whose name is credited to like this record, it is almost like beyond words how I feel sometimes listening to not just this whole body of music, but really like to end it this way, to just have like such a beautiful little piece of music end it. It's haunting. The piano is haunting and it's somber and it's exactly what it felt like to be alive in the fucking snowstorm. No power, no family, no friends, no food, no neighbors to turn to. It was just you hoping that you did not die. And I have friends who had kids and I have friends who had pets. And my fucking tangerine tree, just watching it die, man. Like, that's what that outro, this piano outro, is what it felt like sometimes. It was sad. It was hard. It was sad. That's the closing theme song to my Tangerine Tree's life outro. And so that's the record. Highly collaborative between Brandon and I from a production standpoint. He played most of the music. He's like the most talented person in the world. I thought that when he was 17. Now he's in his 30s, and it's like, you know, anyone can hear the record and hear what he has the capability of doing. His friends came in, all of the elements. You know, if you're a representation of the people you surround yourself with, imagine how talented Brandon is based on like the friends levels of talent that he brought in, right? Adrian and Jason and Colin, and it's like a fever dream of sorts to sit even now and think back on being a part of this album. And there's more to it, right? And I'll sort of like let me maybe discuss the other elements of it that kind of made the album being released such an interesting part of the album story. What I was going through in 2021 was again like the autoimmune thing that I had been dealing with, and like that led up to DEATHBLOOM. You know, I had gotten thrown a bunch of medicine at me, and one of the things that I had kind of temporarily worked, like one of the medicines that I started taking in 2019, it sort of temporarily worked, but like once COVID came around, suddenly like doctors weren't available, and suddenly health insurance was not taking calls, and before I knew it, my medicine just like wasn't being covered anymore, and so I had to stop taking it. And this time I didn't have anywhere to turn or anyone to kind of really help me, and my body just fell apart really fast. 2021, around like May, right when I started working with Brandon, my body just kind of like fell apart, and I was, for the most part, like bedridden for all of the year. The only time that I would get out of my bed, and this is I'm not this is not exaggerating, this is not like being dramatic or hyperbolic. For most of the time, the only time in the week that I would get out of bed was to come to Brandon's house to record for about, I don't know, a couple hours, 2-3 hours. It was every Thursday at 11. Thursday at 11. That was like the calling card of our sessions. And then I would go back home and and just like wither away. And what had happened, you know, not to get too graphic, a piece of my intestine had sort of closed off due to scar tissue. And essentially over the course of like, you know, all of 2021 from May on, I was just slowly like losing the ability to eat food or drink water or process nutrients. My body got weaker and weaker. I lost more and more weight. And that's a whole other thing, man. You want to talk about the sort of like the process of slowly dying, the process of slowly starving to death while mentally watching, like just mentally aware and just like watching it happen with no way to stop it. That was the underlying current of me working on this record. And I've talked about it enough. There are plenty of other places on the internet. There are other podcast things I've done or stories I've told or whatever talking about it. But when I say that in the scariest time of my life, and again, like it's not just like, just remember, COVID, the protests, the political discourse, the attack on the Capitol, the freeze, and now I'm really dying. It just gets worse and worse, right? Like, you know, like it was just a several years worth of just getting beaten up by life. And now I'm looking at the end. The only thing that got me through it, and I cannot stress this enough, the only thing that got me through the experience of what I was dealing with was this album, DEATHBLOOM. It gave me hope. It gave me something to look forward to. It gave me something to work on, to distract myself from the reality of what I was dealing with, my own health. It gave me something to be excited about. It brought me joy. The benefits of working on this album were endless, and I absolutely consider it the thing that got me through. It was like the anchor in the storm of my life at the time. And what eventually ended up happening, so remember, Brandon had COVID mid-December up until about New Year's. I got COVID on New Year's. And I think it went up until about like January. I think I got through it maybe the second or third week of January. And then on January 25th, I got rushed into surgery, emergency surgery, because they had to remove the parts of my intestines that had like just completely closed off. And then recovery, and then imagine like I'm back out of the hospital in like early February. The record comes out February 15th. And then more things happening with Brandon as I'm recovering from surgery. You know, Brandon's got family members that are suddenly rushed into surgery. And it wasn't until March, Brandon's birthday specifically, I think it was Brandon's birthday was the first time in March that him and I were in the same room again. And we were just like looking at each other like, dude, did we like release the record? Like, did that happen? It was a fever dream, man. All of 2021 was a fever dream. My health I was dying. And then the way that it ended, the way that we had to like track the song DEATHBLOOM, the way that we had to we were sending it to someone to mix it, a guy named Matt Melly who lives in Austin. We were getting it mixed virtually, and he would send it back, and we would have to we would have to listen to it for a few days, and then him and I would give our notes, and like this whole process, so much of it was done somehow without us being in the same room. It was just, man, I lack the words, really. I lack the proper words to fully summarize. I mean, at this point, I've been talking for over an hour and a half, and I still don't feel like I really tapped in fully to like the magic of this experience of putting out this album. But I will say from a standpoint of like an artist, I had really come to peace and come to terms with the fact of like with Exit Music being the last thing that I ever did musically. I was totally fine with it. I was 35. I started touring when I was 18, and here I was at 35 years old, and I didn't need to, I didn't need to do anything else. Exit Music was something that was just sort of it was a goodbye. I mean, it's literally called Exit Music. That's a literal, that is a literal, title. I felt like I had done enough. I didn't feel like I had anything else to prove to anybody. And DEATHBLOOM, and so it's funny, like everybody, there's always some saying that it's like when you stop looking for something, that's when it comes, right? DEATHBLOOM was just this beautiful collaborative project that was entirely by chance, and it was entirely inspired by like a freak sort of catastrophe that happened. And Brandon and I just slipped right back into this working professional and artistic relationship that somehow it's like he and I hadn't we hadn't been in the same room for like 10 years, and yet somehow the first day we saw each other we got right back to making music. And take that for what it is. DEATHBLOOM is the complete personification of who Brandon and I are as, like, I don't know, musicians and collaborators and friends and people, and those are all of our influences, and those are all that's like us. That's just who we are. I mean, when DEATHBLOOM is like who we are as people writing together, right? The weird thing about it is, when you think about it, Exit Music was the death of my career, and then for this one, it was like DEATHBLOOM. I hate to be so on the nose, but this record was actually the death bloom of my career, which died with Exit Music, and then was just like blossomed 10 times over with this record coming out. This album, when it was released, was like highly received from just like San Antonio and surrounding areas and friends and family, and like critically, and it got these like great organic write-ups and like featured, like Texas Public Radio did a feature on it, and like I said, it was on the front page of Bandcamp. And just thinking in hindsight about just all of the good that came from this album, just from a very pure, like just a wonderfully pure place. I don't have the words to describe it. I'm still living in it. I mean, the album came out a couple months ago. Right now, it's July of 2022. This album came out in February of 2022. I haven't been the same since, and that also comes with me having sort of recovered from surgery and having had a successful surgery, and now being like on a new medicine that has like just done wonders, and my body and my mind and my spirit all sort of like being given back to me. And alongside that came this project, DEATHBLOOM. Where, wherever my career goes from here, right now I'm 37 years old, far beyond the person that I was in the early days, where I was like this kind of like punk-spirited folk artist who was really trying to spearhead some kind of like movement in San Antonio with like just me and the acoustic guitar. And then sort of came the era of the Raccoon and the Great 85, where I was like highly conceptualized art pieces, where I was really fleshing out my creative juice and like my ability to be an artist, but doing so at the expense of the people around me and the casual observer of my music, because I wasn't doing it for anyone else besides myself. beyond the person that made the Gentleman Streets album, which was someone who was relying completely on ego and image in order to sell a product. It was, I think back about to who that person was, someone who was so highly visible and yet so unhappy and so unsatisfied. And then, of course, I think about the person that released Exit Music, like a very scared, very sad person who was letting go of music and maybe like just like the understanding that I had learned in the 30 some odd years of living that I had tried to make sense of the world. And at the time of writing that album, Exit Music, I was very lost and sad and hurt, and music was like the life raft. And now when I think about the simple pleasure of simply like being able to make music without any expectation or any need or desire or want for anything other than to just simply create and share and collaborate, and it's one of those things where you recognize the how lucky you are to just still be alive, right? Because I've gone through so much in nearly 40 years. I've seen the world change, and I've seen music change, and I've seen the weather change. And without music, I don't know where I would be. I mean, if you're listening to this, clearly you have some kind of vested interest in me or Merykid or whatever. But the truth is, I'm just a person, right? Like, these stories are important to me because this is my life. Every person listening to this and every person on the planet is as uniquely interesting and has this much to tell about their own lives and their own stories and the things that they had to go through and get through in order to find peace or happiness, if that's something they found or if that is something they're still searching for. It's just nice to know at the end of all this that I somehow found a way to allow myself to make music again, and it came at the expense again of a lot of energy and a lot of ideas and a lot of time, but it was worth it, for me to be sitting here now working on the follow-up album with Brandon and working on another album of mine and having released several other songs with other artists already in 2022, having put out several music videos and suddenly remembering all of the sort of beauty of life and the skills that I've learned over the last several years and putting it all together and learning how to just keep collaborating with more people. I just feel blessed. I feel lucky. I'm happy to be alive. And again, to know that this record, DEATHBLOOM, served as the actual death bloom of my career is not lost on me. It's actually what I believe to be a very kind of like funny, like almost like a wink or a nod maybe from God or the universe, just to kind of show me that if anybody's watching, at least God is. With that being said, whether or not this is the last episode or just the last episode of this chapter, it has yet to be seen. But if you got this far, thank you for listening, and I can't wait to hear your story. So this was Merykid Explains, and hopefully